You are standing on a graveyard, but not of people, rather a graveyard of worlds. We look at our glass skyscrapers piercing the clouds and our internet cables wrapping the globe, believing with absolute arrogance that we are the first apex predators of intelligence to walk this planet. But that is a dangerous delusion. Look down at the ground beneath your feet. Deep below the concrete, below the ruins of Rome, below the sands of Egypt, lies the crushed ash of empires that may have been far greater than our own, civilizations that reached the stars only to be silenced in a single night of cosmic violence. Science calls it mass extinction. Ancient texts call it a purification. But the brutal truth is that Earth is a restart machine that wipes the slate clean every few thousand years. We are not the first chapter of this story. We might be the 5th, the 6th, or even the 7th attempt. The question is not if it happened, but when the clock will strike midnight for us. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And, as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. Let us begin with a brutal thought experiment designed to shatter the illusion of permanence that you hold so dear, because if a mysterious virus were to wipe every single human being off the face of the earth this very second, but left our infrastructure intact, the clock on our legacy would start ticking down much faster than you can imagine. Within mere hours, the power grids would fail as fossil fuel plants run dry, plunging the world into a primitive darkness from which it would never recover. Within days, the subway systems of London and New York, which require constant pumping to stay dry, would flood completely, washing away the foundations of the modern metropolises we are so proud of. Within 50 years, the steel skeleton of our skyscrapers would rust, and the glass would shatter under the thermal stress of seasons, causing the skylines of Shanghai and Dubai to crumble like sand castles before the tide. Plastic, which we consider eternal, would eventually degrade into microscopic polymers and be eaten by bacteria or buried under sediment. Fast forward just 10,000 years, which is nothing but a blink of an eye in geological time, and all that would remain of the 21st century would be a thin layer of strange sediment containing high concentrations of heavy metals and radioactive isotopes. If an archaeologist from a different species were to land on Earth 2 million years from now, they would not find the Statue of Liberty or your smartphone or the internet servers that host this video. They would drill into the rock and perhaps wonder if a natural volcanic event caused that weird chemical layer, but they would never suspect that a bipedal species once drove cars and flew into space. This is known as the Silurian Hypothesis, a serious scientific concept that asks whether an industrial civilization could have existed on Earth millions of years prior to humans without leaving a trace. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old, while modern humans have only been here for 300,000 years, and our recorded history is a laughable 6,000 years. Visualize the timeline of Earth as a highway stretching from Los Angeles to New York, where human history is just the final single footstep in Times Square. Do you honestly believe that for thousands of miles of road before that the planet was just sitting there empty and silent, waiting for us to show up and claim the crown? That is a level of narcissism that borders on insanity. The truth is that the planet has been vibrant and violent and occupied long before we arrived, but the geological record is like a book that has been ripped apart, burned, and thrown into a swamp. What we call history is merely the brief silence between catastrophes because we occasionally find things that simply should not exist, glitches in the matrix of time that mainstream academia desperately tries to ignore or explain away as anomalies. Consider the London hammer found in Texas encased in limestone that is 400 million years old. The iron head of the hammer is of such high purity that it has not rusted despite being exposed to moisture, which suggests a metallurgy technique that we only refined in the 20th century, yet it was found in rock that formed when the first fish were crawling onto land. Who was wielding a hammer when there were no dinosaurs, let alone humans? Or look at the Oklo reactor in Gabon, Africa, where in 1972, French physicists discovered that a uranium mine had undergone a self-sustaining nuclear fission reaction 2 billion years ago. Scientists rushed to call it a natural phenomenon, claiming that groundwater and uranium, or just happened to align perfectly to create a nuclear reactor that ran for hundreds of thousands of years without exploding. The statistical probability of that happening by accident is astronomical, yet we are forced to accept it because the alternative is too terrifying to admit. The alternative is that someone was splitting the atom when our ancestors were single-celled organisms. These out-of-place artifacts are the debris of lost worlds' messages in a bottle floating across the ocean of time, warning us that progress is not a straight line ascending forever, but a circle that crushes everything in its path. We are trapped in a loop of rise and ruin where civilizations reach a peak of technology or genetic manipulation, and then trigger a reset mechanism, either by their own hand through war and pollution, or by a cosmic cycle that brings comets and solar flares to scrub the surface of the infected planet. The ancient Hindus knew this with their concept of the yugas, describing time as a wheel where humanity descends from a golden age of spiritual enlightenment down to the Iron Age, or Kali Yuga, where we live now a time of conflict and materialism and short lifespans before the world is destroyed and reborn. We look at these myths and laugh with the confidence of the newcomer, but perhaps those myths are not fairy tales, but autopsies of the civilizations that came before us. We are living on top of a rebooted hard drive, where the previous data has been overwritten, but if you know where to look, you can still see the ghosts of the old files bleeding through. The oil that drives our cars might be the liquefied remains of the biomass of a previous era, and the coal we burn might be the crushed forests of a world that was once mapped and named by beings who thought they were eternal, just like we do. We are the 7th, or perhaps the 8th attempt at intelligence on this rock, and the signs are everywhere that our turn is coming to an end. The magnetic poles are shifting, the sun is entering a volatile cycle, and the Earth itself seems to be waking up from a long slumber, shaking off the parasites that have infested its surface. We need to stop looking at history as a ladder we are climbing and start seeing it as a graveyard we are digging. What happened to the ones before us? And why did they disappear so completely that we have forgotten they even existed? The answer lies not in the stars, but in the mud and the rock and the uncomfortable silence of the missing 100,000 years of human activity. We tend to think of the apocalypse as a purely religious concept or a plot device for science fiction movies, but for the ancients, it was simply history. It was not a matter of if the world would end, but how it would end this time around, because they had seen it happen before with a terrifying regularity. Look at the Maya, who were the absolute masters of time in the ancient world. Their long count calendar was not designed just to track the harvest or the seasons, but to function as a cosmic countdown timer for the ages of the world, which they called suns. According to the Popol Vuh, the creation myth of the Quiche Maya, the gods attempted to create humanity 3 times before they got to us, and every single time they were disappointed and wiped their failed experiments off the face of the earth. The first race was made of mud, and they dissolved back into the earth when the rains came. The second race was made of wood, and they were soulless and cruel, so the gods sent a resin rain of fire, and even their own cooking pots and grinding stones rose up to crush them. We are the people of maize, the 4th attempt. But the Maya also left a warning that our era, the era of the 5th sun, will not last forever, and it is destined to be destroyed not by fire or water, but by a movement of the earth itself. This obsession with cyclical destruction is not limited to Central America, because if you travel across the ocean to India, you find a cosmology that is even more massive and terrifying. The Hindu concept of the yugas divides time into 4 distinct ages, starting with the Satya Yuga, or the Golden Age, where truth and spirituality are at 100%, and humans live for thousands of years. But then the wheel turns, and we descend into the Treta Yuga, and the Dvapara Yuga, losing virtue and lifespan with every step, until we hit rock bottom in the Kali Yuga, or the Iron Age, which is exactly where we are right now. This is the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, where technology peaks, but the spirit dies, and leaders are no better than common thieves. The most disturbing part is that the Hindu texts claim the universe has gone through infinite cycles, like this describing a day of Brahma as lasting 4.32 billion years. How could a civilization without computers or telescopes come up with a number that matches the modern scientific estimate for the age of Earth so perfectly? Unless they were not guessing at all, but were actually consulting an astronomical record handed down from a previous high civilization that had observed the stars long enough to understand the great grinding gears of the galaxy. The pattern is undeniable and global. The Hopi elders of North America say the world has been destroyed 3 times, first by fire, then by ice, and then by water. The Greeks had the 5 ages of man. Every single major tradition agrees that humanity inevitably degenerates from a state of high connection with the cosmos into a state of greedy materialism. And just when we think we are the masters of the universe, the planet shudders and hits the reset button. If these cycles are real, then the global chaos we are witnessing today, from geopolitical instability to environmental collapse, is not just bad luck. It is the death rattle of an age. We are not moving toward a random destruction, but toward a graduation event that has been scheduled since the stars were set in motion, and the anxiety you feel is just the collective instinct of a species that knows deep down that winter is coming. If mythology is the software of human memory, then geology is the hardware that stores the corrupted data of our past, and when we actually bother to read that data, it tells a story more violent than any Hollywood disaster movie. Let's talk about the pole shift. The magnetic field of the Earth is the invisible shield that protects our atmosphere and our DNA from the stripping winds of the sun and cosmic radiation, but it is not the stable constant that your high school textbooks promised it was. Geologists have found irrefutable proof in ancient solidified lava flows that the magnetic poles of this planet have flipped hundreds of times in the past. North becomes south, and south becomes north, in a chaotic dance that leaves the planet temporarily defenseless. The last major excursion, known as the Lachamp event, happened about 42,000 years ago, and during that transition, the magnetic field strength dropped to almost zero, allowing cosmic rays to bombard the surface. This coincides perfectly with the extinction of the Neanderthals and a massive shift in global climate. The terrifying reality is that our magnetic field is weakening right now, and it is weakening fast, having lost about 9% of its strength in the last 150 years, while the magnetic North Pole is sprinting from Canada towards Siberia at a speed that has scientists sweating. Are we standing on the precipice of another flip? But the evidence of past resets goes even deeper than magnetism. It is buried in the coal seams that power our cities. We are taught that coal is simply fossilized plant matter, compressed over millions of years, but every now and then, miners break open a vein of coal and find things that are impossible. In 1851 in Massachusetts, a metal bell vase was blasted out of solid pudding stone rock that was 600 million years old. In 1912 in Oklahoma, an iron pot fell out of a large chunk of coal dated to the Carboniferous period around 300 million years ago. Who dropped an iron pot into a swamp 300 million years before the first dinosaur evolved? If we stop dismissing these objects as hoaxes and start treating them as evidence, they paint a picture that is hard to swallow. They suggest that industrial civilizations might be a recurring trap that intelligent life falls into over and over again. Perhaps we are not the first to burn fossil fuels. Perhaps the oil and coal we are extracting today are the compressed remains of the biomass of a previous civilization that grew too big and was buried by a cataclysm. We are literally running our cars on the ghosts of the past. This leads to a dark theory that the Earth operates on a cycle of rise, extract, destroy, and repeat. A species evolves, discovers the dense energy of carbon builds, massive cities, changes the climate, and is then wiped out by nature or by their own hubris. The planet then takes a few million years to heal, creating new coal and oil from the ruins just in time for the next species to dig it up and make the exact same mistake. We look at our plastic waste and our nuclear waste and think it will last forever, but the Earth has a way of digesting everything. If we are the seventh civilization to walk this path, then the only difference between us and the ones buried in the coal is that we are still awake to see the end coming. If Earth has been reset multiple times, then we face a terrifying follow-up question. Has humanity itself been reset? Look in the mirror and ask yourself honestly why we are so biologically out of sync with the natural world. Every other animal on this planet is perfectly adapted to its environment. Polar bears have thick fur and blubber, camels have water-storing humps, and cheetahs have the muscle density to hunt. But us? We are naked, weak, and thin-skinned creatures that get sunburned if we stand outside for too long. We have back pain because our spines never fully adapted to walking upright. Human childbirth is a torturous and life-threatening ordeal, a biological design flaw caused by the infant's skull being too large for the mother's pelvis, something no other wild animal struggles with to this degree. This is not evolution. This looks like a rushed job or a downgrade. The oldest texts of the Sumerians who wrote history before the Bible was even a thought. Do not say humans evolved from apes. They say explicitly that we were created, and the word they use does not imply magic, it implies manufacturing. They describe the Anunnaki gods taking their own essence and mixing it with the clay of the earth to create a hybrid species called Lulu Amalu, a primitive worker. The purpose was not to create friends, but to create obedient slaves to replace the lower gods in the mines. This sounds like pure science fiction until you look at human chromosome number 2. This is the smoking gun of genetics. All great apes, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, have 24 pairs of chromosomes. Humans only have 23. In biology, losing a pair of chromosomes is usually a death sentence, not a recipe for becoming the smartest species on the planet. But when scientists decoded the human genome, they found something that should not be there. Our second chromosome is actually 2 ape chromosomes fused together. You can literally see the weld marks where the telomeres, which are supposed to be at the ends, are stuck right in the middle. In nature, the probability of 2 chromosomes fusing perfectly in a single individual who then survives, reproduces, and replaces the entire population is virtually 0. Someone went into our source code and edited us. Someone turned off certain features and turned on others. This leads to a shocking hypothesis about the cycles of civilization. We might not be the original version of humanity. There may have been previous versions, the golden race of myth, who were taller, stronger, lived for hundreds of years, and possessed psychic abilities that we can only dream of. But after every reset, the survivors were either genetically degraded by the radiation of the cataclysm or deliberately downgraded by their controllers to be more manageable. We could be the light version of a once great species operating on hardware that has been locked down. The supernatural abilities that monks and psychics occasionally tap into might not be miracles. They might just be old subroutines buried in the 98% of junk DNA that scientists still don't understand. The story of Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit is not about sin. It is a metaphor for a slave species regaining consciousness and breaking the biological locks that their creators put in place. And every time humanity gets too smart, too strong, or too close to becoming gods ourselves, the reset button is pressed. The flood didn't just wash the earth clean, it washed our genetic memory clean. So when the sky fell and the waters rose to swallow the world, where did the architects of the previous civilization go? They didn't vanish into thin air. They went down. All over the world, we find evidence of a strange obsession with the underground, right around the time of the great cataclysms. Go to Cappadocia in Turkey and stand in awe of Derinkuyu. This is not some crude cave where cavemen hid from bears. This is an engineering marvel equivalent to building the Great Pyramid but inverted into the earth. Derinkuyu goes nearly 300 feet deep, with 18 distinct levels carved into soft volcanic rock, capable of housing 20,000 people, along with their livestock, food stores, wine presses, schools, and chapels. but the most chilling detail is the security system. Each floor could be sealed off by massive circular stone doors weighing thousands of pounds, looking like giant millstones that could only be rolled shut from the inside. This is the design of a doomsday bunker. Their enemy was not a roving band of bandits. Their enemy was the atmosphere outside. The ventilation system of Derinkuyu is an aerodynamic masterpiece, with over 15,000 air shafts drilled vertically through the rock to ensure fresh air reached even the deepest levels. Who taught so-called primitive people advanced mining ventilation? And why did they need to live like moles? The answer lies in the sky. During the Younger Dryas event, when the ozone layer was likely shredded by comet impacts or solar flares, the surface of the Earth would have been bathed in lethal ultraviolet radiation. Anything living on the surface would have been cooked or genetically mutated. The underground was the only safe zone. And Derinkuyu is not alone. The Hopi people of North America have a legend that is almost too specific to be a myth. They say that when the first world was destroyed by fire and the second world by ice, the righteous Hopi were led underground by the ant people. These ant people fed them, taught them how to grow food in the dark, and kept them safe until the surface world was habitable again. The linguistic connection is terrifying. In the Hopi language, the word for ant people is Anu Sinom. If you break that down in ancient Sumerian, Anu means sky and Naki means underground. The phonetic similarity between the Hopi Anu Sinom and the Sumerian Anunnaki is impossible to ignore. Are the ant people of the Hopi and the gods of the Sumerians the same group of entities? A high-tech faction that predicted the cataclysm built these underground cities and took a select group of humans down with them to preserve the species. This explains why civilization seems to re-emerge so suddenly and fully formed after every reset. The people who walked out of the earth after thousands of years of hiding carried with them the seeds of agriculture, architecture, and astronomy, knowledge that seemed like magic to the scattered survivors on the surface. They became the civilization bringers, like Osiris, Quetzalcoatl, and Viracocha. All of them are described as coming from a distant place, often bearded and white-skinned, perhaps from generations of living without sunlight, carrying bags of seeds. We are looking at a standard emergency protocol of a high-level civilization. They were not gods. They were bunker survivors, the librarians of human knowledge during the prehistoric nuclear winter. And if Derinkuyu has been found, how many more underground cities are still sleeping beneath our feet, still sealing the secrets of the previous cycle? It is entirely possible that right now, while we worry about war and climate change on the surface, they are still down there, watching, waiting for the right moment to intervene, or to close the blast doors once again. Let us stand before the Great Pyramid of Giza, not as tourists listening to a rehearsed script, but as electrical engineers analyzing a schematic. The greatest and most persistent lie in human history is the assertion that this structure is the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu. Think about it with pure logic. If you were the most powerful king on earth building your eternal resting place, why would you not carve a single hieroglyph on the walls to celebrate your reign? Why has no mummy ever been found inside? Why is the so-called sarcophagus in the king's chamber a rough, undecorated granite box that looks more like an industrial tank than a royal coffin? The truth is hidden in the materials themselves. The Great Pyramid is not architecture, It is a machine. Look at the outer casing, which was originally made of white Tura limestone. Limestone is a fantastic electrical insulator. Now look at the inside, which is constructed of massive blocks of red granite shipped from Aswan. Granite is filled with quartz crystals, and quartz has a very specific physical property called piezoelectricity. This means that if you squeeze it or vibrate it, it generates an electrical current. The entire structure of the pyramid, with its resonance chambers and the massive granite beams weighing 70 tons stacked above the king's chamber, is designed to vibrate. It is a massive geomechanical power plant. The engineer Christopher Dunn has proposed a theory that is hard to dismiss. The pyramid was built to harvest the vibrational energy of the Earth itself, seismic noise and the planet's pulse, and amplify it through the crystal lattice of the granite to create a wireless electromagnetic field. Nikola Tesla, the forgotten genius of the 20th century, understood this. His Wardenclyffe Tower, the ambitious project intended to transmit wireless electricity across the globe, was built upon the exact same principles of location, aquifers, and resonance as the Great Pyramid. Tesla did not invent something new. He was trying to rediscover lost technology. Look at the narrow tunnels that archaeologists lazily call air shafts. They cannot be for air because they were sealed at both ends. Modern robots have explored these shafts and found copper fittings and evidence of chemical corrosion. In an electrical circuit, these are electrodes. It is highly probable that chemical solutions, perhaps hydrated zinc and hydrochloric acid, were poured down these shafts to create a chemical reaction that released hydrogen gas, turning the entire pyramid into a giant maser, microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. If this is true, then ancient Egypt was not lit by smoky torches. It was powered by a clean, wireless energy grid that we are only just beginning to dream of. We see depictions of this in the crypts of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, where reliefs show massive light bulbs with snake-like filaments inside hooked up to jed pillars, which look suspiciously like insulators. The collapse of this civilization was not just a cultural loss, it was a global blackout. When the cataclysm struck, the Giza power plant was damaged. The insulating casing stones were shaken loose or stolen by survivors to build houses, and the machine went silent. Later dynasties found these awe-inspiring structures but had no idea how to turn them on, so they mimicked the shape and used them as tombs, creating the confusion that has blinded us for 5,000 years. We are living in the ruins of a high-tech energy grid, digging in the dirt for coal, like savages burning furniture to stay warm in a smart home that has lost power. If they had free energy, where did they go with it? The answer is lying on old, crumbling maps that depict lands that no human eye was supposed to have seen. Let's talk about Antarctica. Our textbooks state with absolute confidence that the frozen continent was first discovered in 1820 by Russian and American explorers. Before that, it was just a blank space, or a mythical southern land. But the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral on gazelle skin, slaps mainstream history in the face. This map depicts the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of South America with an accuracy in longitude that European sailors would not be able to calculate until the invention of the chronometer centuries later. But the real shock lies at the bottom of the map. It shows a coastline extending from South America to the east, perfectly matching the topography of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica. The problem is that it shows it without ice. It depicts rivers, mountain ranges, and estuaries, where today there is nothing but a mile-thick sheet of ice. Skeptics dismiss this as a fantasy, claiming Piri Reis just drew random land to fill the page. But in 1949, a seismic survey by a British-Swedish expedition mapped the actual bedrock of Antarctica beneath the ice. The result was chilling. The subglacial topography matched what Piri Reis had drawn almost perfectly. This implies only one thing. Someone mapped Antarctica before it froze. According to ice core samples, the last time Queen Maud Land was ice-free was at least 6,000 years ago, and possibly as far back as before the last ice age, 12,000 years ago. Piri Reis noted on the map that he did not draw it himself, but compiled it from 20 older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. These source maps came from the burning library of Alexandria, the repository of the knowledge of the previous civilization. And Piri Reis is not alone. The Orontius Phineas map of 1531 shows the entire continent of Antarctica with mountain ranges and rivers flowing into the sea at the exact locations where massive glaciers now sit. The Boache map of 1737 even depicts Antarctica as two large islands separated by a waterway, a geological fact that we only confirmed recently with satellite technology. This proves the existence of a global maritime civilization in prehistory. These were not isolated tribes. These were ocean-going explorers who mapped the entire globe with mathematical precision using spherical trigonometry long before the Greeks. Charles Hapgood, in his book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, proposed the theory of Earth crust displacement. He suggested that the outer shell of the Earth can slide over the molten interior like the skin of an orange sliding over the fruit. A catastrophic event, like an asteroid impact or a massive imbalance of polar ice, caused the crust to slip, shoving Antarctica from a temperate zone down to its current polar position, causing it to flash freeze. This is why the maps show it green, and why we find fossils of leaves and coal deposits there. Antarctica might not just be a frozen wasteland. It could be the lost continent of Atlantis, or the hub of the lost civilization we are searching for. When the crust shifted, the cities were crushed, the continents were drowned by tsunamis, and the survivors on the great ships became the seeds of civilization scattered across the globe. We are looking at the inheritance documents of a world that was connected and globalized long before the internet. Those maps are the proof that we were once citizens of a much larger world, a world that was torn apart by the rage of the planet. If we are living in a simulation or a constructed reality, then the moon is the camera lens that is constantly watching us. We take the moon for granted because it has hung in our sky since the day we were born. But if you look at it through the eyes of an astronomer or a mathematician, it is the single most impossible object in the known universe. Isaac Asimov, one of the greatest minds in science fiction and biochemistry, once famously stated that by all laws of celestial mechanics, the moon should not exist. It is simply too big. No other planet in the solar system has a moon that is 1/4 the size of the host planet. It is a freak of nature. But the strangeness goes far beyond size. Let's talk about the mathematics of the eclipse. The moon is exactly 400 times smaller than the sun, and it sits exactly 400 times closer to Earth than the Sun. This 1 in a billion mathematical coincidence means that when the Moon passes in front of the Sun, it covers the solar disk perfectly, down to the millimeter, creating a total solar eclipse. There is no reason in physics for this to happen. It is pure geometry, and in nature, chaos rules, not precise geometry. It feels less like a celestial accident and more like a calibrated instrument. In the 1960s, Soviet scientists Michael Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov published a controversial theory that the Moon is not a natural satellite at all, but a hollowed-out planetoid, a spaceship parked in our orbit by a super-civilization billions of years ago. They argued that the craters on the Moon are too shallow. When a massive asteroid hits a planetary body, it should gouge out a deep hole. Yet the craters on the Moon, even the biggest ones, are surprisingly flat, as if the impactor hit an impenetrable armored hull beneath the dusty surface and exploded outward rather than penetrating deep. But the real shock came during the Apollo missions. On November 20th, 1969, the Apollo 12 crew jettisoned their lunar module ascent stage, crashing it onto the Moon's surface to test the seismic sensors they had left behind. NASA scientists were stunned when the Moon rang like a bell. The reverberations lasted for over an hour. When Apollo 13 dropped its heavier booster stage, the Moon rang for over 3 hours and vibrated to a depth of 25 miles. Natural rocky bodies do not ring, hollow metal spheres do. This suggests that the Moon might have a metallic shell or a honeycombed interior, reinforcing the hollow moon theory. And then there are the myths. Ancient Zulu legends speak of a time before the Moon, when the sky was dark at night and the seasons were different. They call the Moon an egg that was brought here by 2 brothers, Wawan and Mpanku, who stole it from a great fire dragon. When they placed it in orbit, it caused catastrophic floods and altered the rotation of the Earth. The Greeks also spoke of the Proselines, the people who lived in Arcadia before the Moon was in the sky. If the Moon was artificially placed here, what is its purpose? It stabilizes the Earth's axial tilt, which in turn creates the stable seasons necessary for agriculture and civilization. Without the Moon, Earth would wobble chaotically, and advanced life would be impossible. Is it a terraforming engine? A stabilizer brought here to make Earth habitable for the colony? Or is it a prison warden, locking us into a specific frequency of reality, controlling our tides, and perhaps even our biological cycles? We are the only species whose female reproductive cycle is perfectly synchronized with the lunar phase. That is a biological link that suggests we are tethered to that gray sphere in ways we do not understand. If civilization has been reset, the Moon is the silent witness that has seen every single one of them rise and fall, a sentinel that never blinks, possibly broadcasting our status to whoever or whatever parked it there. If the Moon represents the control system, then the evidence on the ground represents the consequences of rebellion. We are taught that the atomic bomb was invented by Robert Oppenheimer in 1945, but when Oppenheimer witnessed the first detonation at the Trinity test site, he did not quote a physics textbook. He quoted the Bhagavad Gita, an ancient Hindu text. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." When asked later by students if the Trinity explosion was the first nuclear detonation in history, he replied with a chilling, cryptic phrase, "Yes, in modern times." Oppenheimer knew something that modern historians refuse to admit. He knew that the ancient texts contain descriptions of weapons that sound identical to our nuclear arsenal. The Mahabharata describes a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. It describes an explosion as bright as 10,000 suns, rising in a column of smoke and fire that looked like a gigantic parasol, a mushroom cloud. It goes on to describe the after effects: hair and nails falling out, pottery breaking without cause, birds turning white, and food becoming poisoned. These are the exact clinical symptoms of acute radiation sickness, a condition that no ancient storyteller could possibly invent because they had no concept of radiation, unless they had seen it. And the evidence is not just in the books. It is in the dirt. Go to Pakistan, to the ancient city of Mohenjo Daro, which translates literally to the Hill of the Dead. Archaeologists found something terrifying there: skeletons scattered in the streets, holding hands, sprawling in doorways, struck down in an instant. There was no evidence of sword wounds, no signs of scavengers eating the bodies. They just dropped dead. The radiation levels recorded in these skeletons were comparable to those found in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the epicenter of the city, there is evidence of extreme heat. Stones and bricks fused together, vitrified into glass. You need temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Celsius to melt brick like that, temperatures that a wood fire or a volcano cannot produce. Only an atomic blast or a concentrated beam weapon can do that. Now, travel to the Libyan desert. Scattered across hundreds of miles of sand is a mysterious substance known as Libyan desert glass, pieces of pure yellow-green glass formed from the sand itself. To turn sand into this kind of glass, you need a sudden thermal burst of incredible magnitude. Scientists have tried to explain it as a meteorite impact, but there is no crater, no impact site. The only explanation that fits the physics is an airburst, an explosion detonating high above the ground, melting the desert surface below without digging a hole. This mirrors exactly the Tunguska event, or a nuclear airburst detonation. We are looking at the scars of a planetary war that took place thousands of years ago. A war between the gods, who used weapons we are only just rediscovering, the vitrified forts of Scotland, the fused ruins of the Hittite capital Hattusa, and the radioactive skeletons of India all tell the same story. We did not invent the apocalypse, we inherited the blueprint. The reason humanity has such a deep, primal fear of the mushroom cloud is not because of the Cold War, it is because of a genetic memory. We have been burned by this fire before. The civilization before us didn't just fade away, they blew themselves up, or they were targeted for extermination by a force that decided they had become too dangerous. And as we stockpile thousands of nuclear warheads today, aiming them at our own cities, we are simply setting the stage for the same tragedy to play out again. The wheel of time turns, and we are standing in the shadow of the same mistakes that turned the last world into glass. If the clock of civilization is ticking, then what is the mechanism that winds it? Why do these resets happen with such terrifying mathematical precision? The answer might be lurking at the very edge of our solar system, a ghost in the darkness that the ancients knew by name, but modern science is only just beginning to admit exists. The Sumerians called it Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. They did not describe it as a static object, but as a celestial traveler on a massive, elliptical orbit that brings it crashing through the inner solar system once every 3,600 years. For decades, astronomers laughed at this idea, dismissing it as the fantasy of a primitive culture. But the laughter stopped in 2016 when astronomers at Caltech, Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown, the man who killed Pluto, announced that they had found mathematical evidence for a massive Planet 9 lurking deep in the Kuiper Belt. They didn't see it with a telescope, but they saw its gravity. Something massive, about 10 times the size of Earth, is out there, pulling the orbits of dwarf planets into strange, clustered alignments. The math perfectly matches the ancient description of Nibiru. If this planet exists, it is not just a rock, it is a wrecking ball. When a body of that mass enters the inner solar system, it acts like a bull in a china shop. Its gravitational field would tug on the sun, causing massive solar flares that could fry our electrical grid in seconds. It would disturb the asteroid belt, sending a rain of rocks plummeting toward Earth. Perhaps the same stars falling from the sky described in the Book of Revelation. It would pull on Earth's crust, triggering the massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that mark the end of every age. This explains the cycle of fire and the cycle of water. If Nibiru passes on one side of Earth, we get tidal waves and floods. If it passes on the other, we get solar storms and fire. This 3,600-year cycle, or SAR, as the Sumerians called it, aligns suspiciously well with the gaps in human history. The collapse of the Bronze Age, the biblical flood, the sudden disappearance of the Clovis people, all seem to pulse to the rhythm of this orbital intruder. We are like ants living on a railroad track. We have built our hills and our societies during the long, quiet intervals between the trains, convincing ourselves that the track is safe, that the shaking ground is just a myth. But the train runs on a schedule. The anxiety that pervades modern society, the obsession with doomsday pre-oping, might be an instinctive reaction to the approach of this cosmic giant. We can't see it yet, but perhaps our bodies can feel the gravitational tremor, the dark star returning to clear the board for the next game. But there is a theory that goes even deeper than rogue planets or nuclear wars, a theory that suggests the reset is not physical at all, but digital. What if the reason we can't find the missing civilizations is that they were deleted from the hard drive? Welcome to simulation theory. In 1977, science fiction author Philip K. Dick stood in front of a confused audience in Metz, France, and declared, "We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs." He was talking about glitches in the Matrix decades before the Wachowskis wrote the movie. Look at physics. The deeper we look into the subatomic world, the more it looks like code. The double-slit experiment proves that particles do not exist in a definite state until they are observed. They exist as a wave of probabilities, like a video game that only renders the room when the player walks into it to save processing power. Why would the universe need to save processing power unless it is a simulation? And look at the fine-tuning problem. The fundamental constants of the universe, the speed of light, the strength of gravity, the electromagnetic force, are dialed in to such a precise degree that if you changed any of them by a fraction of a percent, life could not exist. It looks less like a chaotic explosion and more like a calibrated software environment designed specifically for us. If this is true, then a civilization reset is simply a server reboot. When the players, us, get too unruly, or when the code becomes too corrupted with viruses, war, pollution, genetic degradation, the great programmer simply wipes the memory and reloads the level. This explains the Mandela effect, where millions of people share distinct, identical memories of events that history says never happened. We remember a cornucopia on the Fruit of the Loom logo. We remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 80s. Are these false memories, or are they residue from a previous version of the simulation, save files that didn't get fully overwritten during the last update? The Gnostics, an ancient sect of early Christianity, believed this thousands of years ago. They taught that the material world is a false construct, a prison created by a false god called the Demiurge to trap our divine sparks. They believed that apocalypse, which literally means unveiling in Greek, is not the destruction of the world, but the revealing of the illusion. Perhaps the resets happen every time humanity gets close to breaking the code, close to realizing that the walls of our cage are made of pixels, not atoms. We are searching for physical ruins, but maybe we should be looking for errors in the code, for the Easter eggs left by the developers that tell us the true nature of our reality. If the evidence for these lost civilizations is so overwhelming, why isn't it on the front page of every newspaper? Why aren't professors teaching it in universities? The answer is simple and chilling, because history is not about truth, it is about control. There is a concerted effort by the guardians of the status quo to maintain the illusion of a linear, safe, and Darwinian progression of history. If we admitted that humans were once greater than we are now, it would destroy the authority of the current scientific and religious institutions. Enter the Smithsonian Institution. In the late 19th century, as settlers pushed west across North America, they encountered thousands of burial mounds containing the skeletons of men who stood 7, 8, and sometimes 9 feet tall, often buried with copper armor and pearls. Local newspapers reported these finds on a weekly basis. But then Major John Wesley Powell, the director of the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology, issued a doctrine that would become the law of the land. No pre-Columbian civilization in America was more advanced than the native tribes found by the settlers. This was a political move to justify the seizure of native lands. If the Indians were savages who never built anything great, taking their land was progress. But to enforce this lie, the evidence had to disappear. Thousands of giant skeletons were shipped to the Smithsonian for study and were never seen again. When researchers ask about them today, they are told the files were lost or the bones crumbled to dust. This is an orchestrated amnesia. And it's not just in America. The Vatican Secret Archives in Rome contains 53 miles of shelving, most of which is strictly off-limits to the public. What are they hiding? It is rumored that they possess books saved from the Library of Alexandria, texts that detail the history of the pre-flood world, the genealogy of the Nephilim, and the technology of the gods. The burning of the Library of Alexandria was not an accident. It was a targeted deletion of the hard drive of human knowledge. The same happened when the conquistadors burned thousands of Mayan codices, leaving only 4 in existence. Every time a reset happens, the first thing the new rulers do is destroy the records of the past. They want us to believe that we are the pinnacle of creation, that we are alone and unique, because a population that knows it is just the latest in a long line of failed experiments is a population that is hard to control. They are keeping us in a state of historical childhood, denying us our inheritance so that we keep spinning the wheels of their economy, unaware that the road we are on ends at a cliff. But the most terrifying part of this cycle is not that we are being lied to. It is that we are willingly walking into the exact same trap that destroyed the ones before us. We look at our smartphones, our artificial intelligence, and our genetic engineering with pride, thinking we are inventing the future. But what if we are simply remembering the past? The Tower of Babel in the Bible was not just a tall building. It was a symbol of a unified humanity speaking one language, a metaphor for a global information network, an ancient internet. They were trying to reach the heavens and become like gods. And what happened? God came down and scattered them, confusing their language to stop the project. Why? Because they were building something dangerous. Look at what we are doing right now. We are on the verge of creating artificial general intelligence, a mind that is superior to our own. We are editing the human genome with CRISPR, playing the role of the Anunnaki all over again. We are merging man with machine, talking about uploading our consciousness to the cloud to achieve immortality. This is the ultimate hubris. It is very likely that the previous advanced civilizations didn't just get hit by rocks from space. They destroyed themselves with their own technology. Maybe Atlantis didn't sink because of an earthquake. Maybe it sank because they tampered with the zero-point energy of the Earth, destabilizing the planetary crust. Maybe the gods weren't aliens, but transhumanists from a previous epoch who genetically modified themselves into monsters. The gray goo scenario, where self-replicating nanobots consume all biomass on Earth, might have happened 1 million years ago, leaving only a lifeless rock that had to be reseeded. We are racing toward the singularity, the point of no return. We are building a new Tower of Babel out of silicon and code, and the universe seems to have a built-in immune system that reacts when a species gets too arrogant. We are not breaking new ground, we are reenacting a tragedy. The reason we don't find robots from the past is that the reset was so complete it wiped out the silicon as well as the bone. We are holding the gun of technology to our own heads, convinced that this time we will pull the trigger and a flower will come out. But the gun is loaded with the same bullets that killed the last 6 versions of us. So here we stand, at the edge of the precipice, and the signs of the end are all around us for those with eyes to see. You can feel it, can't you? The quickening. Time seems to be speeding up. The days feel shorter. The weather is becoming more violent and unpredictable, with once-in-a-century storms happening every year. These are not coincidences. They are symptoms of a planet that is preparing to shift. The Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the Earth, has been spiking to unprecedented levels, suggesting that the vibrational frequency of the planet is changing. The magnetic poles are racing across the Arctic, weakening our shield against the sun. Birds and whales are beaching themselves in record numbers because their internal navigation systems are going haywire. And look at human society. The polarization, the madness, the breakdown of logic and morality. This is the mental atmosphere deteriorating just before the physical collapse. The Hopi prophesied that near the end, the world would be spun around by cobwebs in the sky, our power lines and internet cables. They said that women would become men and men would become women, a reflection of the blurring of biological reality. They warned of a gourd of ashes falling from the sky, nuclear weapons. We are ticking every single box on the checklist of the apocalypse. The geopolitical tension is at a boiling point, with superpowers playing chicken with nuclear fire. The global economy is a house of cards waiting for a breeze. The sun is entering a grand solar minimum while simultaneously throwing off X-class flares. It feels like the director of this cosmic play is ramping up the tension for the grand finale. We are not living in normal times. We are living in the final seconds of the 11th hour. The stage is set, the actors are in place, and the curtain is about to fall. The question is not, will it happen, but will you be ready when the lights go out? If the history of the world is a recurring nightmare of destruction, then the ultimate question is not how to hide, but how to wake up. We have spent this entire journey looking at physical evidence, stone, bone, ice, and metal. But the most important artifact of the lost civilizations is not something you can hold in your hand. It is something you hold in your mind. Why did the ancients, from the Egyptians to the Hindus to the Gnostics, obsess over the elevation of consciousness? Why did they build acoustic chambers in the pyramids designed to alter brainwave frequencies? Because they understood the physics of the reset better than we do. They knew that the cataclysm is not just a physical event, it is a frequency event. The Gnostics believed that the material world is a dense, low-vibrational trap, a farm designed to harvest the energy of human fear. When the cycle ends, when the sky burns and the waters rise, the harvest begins. Those who are trapped in fear, attachment, and materialism are recycled back into the simulation, back into the wheel of samsara, to start over in the mud of the Stone Age. But those who remember who they are, those who realize that they are immortal sparks of consciousness merely wearing a biological spacesuit, can break the cycle. This is the rapture or the ascension mentioned in every scripture. But it has nothing to do with being beamed up by a spaceship. It is about shifting your internal frequency so that you no longer resonate with the destruction of the material plane. The elites of our world know this. They are building their bunkers in New Zealand and Hawaii, hoarding seeds and gold, thinking that survival is about preserving the physical body. But they are making the same mistake as the Atlanteans. You cannot dig a hole deep enough to hide from a solar flash that penetrates the soul. The great solar flash, predicted by many ancient cultures, is not just a killer wave of radiation. It is an upgrade signal. It is a blast of cosmic information that interacts with our DNA. For those whose DNA is dormant, clogged with the toxins of modern life and the stress of the matrix, it is destructive. But for those who have done the work, who have unlocked the junk DNA, it is the key to the next level of evolution. This is why the system is working so hard to keep you in a state of constant, low-level anxiety. The news, the wars, the social media algorithms, they are all jamming signals designed to keep your frequency low, to keep you rooted in the survival brain so that you miss the signal when it comes. The awakening is not a new religion, it is the act of remembering. It is the sudden, visceral realization that you have been here before, that the anxiety you feel is not fear of the future, but a memory of the past. You are a veteran of the psychic wars, a survivor of the previous 6 resets, and you came back now, at the end of the 7th cycle, not to die, but to graduate. The ruins we see are not just warnings, they are invitations to reclaim the power that was taken from us. The game is rigged, yes, but it is only rigged if you think you are just a piece on the board. The moment you realize you are the player, the game changes. We have walked a long and dark road tonight. We have stood in the shadow of the pyramids, peered into the frozen eyes of Antarctica, and touched the radioactive glass of ancient deserts. We have peeled back the layers of history to reveal a terrifying and beautiful truth, that we are not the first, and we will not be the last. The story of humanity is not a straight line from primitive ignorance to modern glory. It is a spiral, a dance of creation and destruction that spans eons. To accept this is to let go of the arrogance of the modern world, the false security that tells us we are the masters of the planet. It is humbling, yes, but it is also liberating. Because if civilizations rise and fall like the tides, then the end of our world is not the end of the story. It is simply the turning of the page. The silence of the missing 100,000 years is not empty. It is filled with the whispers of our ancestors, urging us not to make the same mistakes, urging us to look up from our screens and remember the stars. You are the descendant of the survivors. The blood that runs in your veins is the blood of those who outran the flood, who survived the ice, who hid in the caves when the sky fell. You carry the resilience of 1,000 generations. So do not fear the cycle. Do not fear the changes that are coming to our Earth. Fear is the mind killer, the shackle that binds you to the crumbling wreckage of the old age. Instead, stand tall in the knowledge that you were built for this time. The reason you are drawn to these mysteries, the reason you are listening to this voice in the dark, is because you are part of the team that is meant to remember. You are the seeds of the next world waiting to germinate in the ashes of this one. History is sleeping, but you are awake. And as we close this chapter, I want to thank you for taking this journey into the unknown with me. The algorithm hates the truth, but this community thrives on it. If this video sparked a memory or shifted your perspective, please ignite that like button and subscribe to the channel. It is a small gesture, but it helps us keep the fire burning in the digital darkness. Tell me in the comments, do you feel the cycle turning? What signs have you seen in your own life? I read every single theory you share. For those who want to support our research further, check the links in the description. But most importantly, keep your eyes open. The past is not gone. It is just waiting for you to find it. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, the truth is not out there. It is in you. Good night.